What's the definition of the GOAT? Is it the best player ever or the greatest player ever? Are these terms interchangeable? Most of us understand that the GOAT refers to the greatest player of all time, as it literally states. However, what is the difference between the greatest player of all time and the best player ever? Let's delve into it. Having numbers is valuable. Those who watch my channel know my affinity for numbers. However, numbers alone do not prove a player's greatness. Numbers are merely a reflection of a player's production. There is much more to consider than a player running for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game. Numbers and accomplishments together paint a complete picture of greatness. It is not just about how many touchdowns one has scored, but also how significant those touchdowns were in terms of contributing to the team's success. That is why Dan Marino, who led the league in almost every major quarterback statistic for over half a decade, was never considered greater than Joe Montana. Accomplishments and numbers tell the whole story. Marino possessed all the records and passing yards, the touchdowns. In many aspects, he was a better and more talented quarterback. His numbers attested to it. However, Montana had both major accomplishments and great numbers. Surprisingly, that makes a substantial difference. It really does. Montana did not simply have numbers. He had numbers in crucial games. Marino, on the other hand, often did not perform well in important games. In essence, for Montana, numbers were not just a means to an end. Instead, numbers were the fuel that propelled Montana to achieve great things. He reached his full potential because he excelled in both statistics and accomplishments. He left nothing on the table, and to me, this epitomizes greatness. It is evident that according to accomplishments and numbers, EMMITT Smith surpasses Barry Sanders, Walter Payton, and Jim Brown. However, the argument is not that clear-cut. Over the years and even during his playing career, Smith's critics constructed a narrative that has stuck even until this day. If we're going to determine whether Smith is truly the greatest of all time, we need to address a few arguments. And when I say address, I really mean it. Let's strap in because things are about to get intense. I'm sure you've encountered this argument if you've ever debated with someone who dislikes EMMITT Smith. It's the longevity argument. But why do we dismiss longevity as if it's a negative thing? Athletes practice, take medicine after injuries, and make sacrifices to stay healthy and extend their careers. It's only natural for them to want to be at their best for as long as possible. Longevity is a gift that everyone strives for, but only a few manage to achieve it. EMMITT Smith is one of those few. He's the only running back on the Mount Rushmore of football who had an incredible prime and continued to shine long after. From 1998 to 2001, Smith recorded an impressive 4,986 rushing yards and 36 rushing touchdowns. That's an average of almost 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns per season. Even more incredible is the fact that during Ezekiel Elliott's first 4 years, from 2016 to 2019, Smith's numbers are eerily similar. Elliott accumulated over 5,400 yards and 40 touchdowns. Keep in mind that no other running back in the entire league had more yards than Elliott during that time. Yet, Smith had comparable numbers towards the end of his career, long past his prime, and while playing for a struggling Cowboys team. Another argument I find ridiculous is when people claim that EMMITT played longer, so he has more yards than Sanders. It's as if they believe that EMMITT was only better than Barry after Barry retired.
When you look at when EMMITT Smith ended up getting that honor, a lot of people looked at it and says, well, it's kind of an asterisk beside it. You got it because Barry no longer wanted to play.
Like EMMITT finally caught up after 99. Such a notion is utterly ridiculous. Let's compare both players based on the years they played. To be fair, Barry retired 5 years before EMMITT did. However, it's also fair to note that EMMITT came into the league 1 year after Barry. So if we compare EMMITT's production from 1990, his first year, to 1999, Barry's last year, how will the numbers stack up? Here's the numbers. Even in this comparison, EMMITT still outperforms Barry. These are year-to-year comparisons. I understand that Barry had better peak years in terms of yards if we look at individual seasons. However, when it comes to overall value, EMMITT had the best years in that same aspect. For multiple seasons, EMMITT led the league in both touchdowns and yards, while Barry never accomplished that. This statement is perhaps the most absurd and frustrating of them all. If having a talented team around you is the sole reason for a player's success, then we should exclude Jerry Rice, Jim Brown, Joe Montana, Peyton Manning, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Bill Russell, Babe Ruth, and Wayne Gretzky from GOAT conversations. Each of them played with a star cast at some point. Why should Smith be penalized for the players he had around him? And if we are going to penalize him, why not apply the same logic to others as well? At the end of the day, Smith had to perform, and he did so exceptionally well. He had to run the ball, he had to use his instincts or follow his assignments. He had to play when he was hurt or take the load when the passing wasn't working. This responsibility didn't fall on his teammates. It was his responsibility. And if he didn't perform or meet the task, he would be cut as an individual player, not as a team. Let's delve a little deeper. Just how valuable was EMMITT to his team? Well, according to the critics, EMMITT was just a tag-along, right? But let's truly assess this value. Throughout his entire career with Dallas, he only missed 7 games. Now, during that time, Dallas had a 1-6 record, which means the Cowboys only won 16.67% of the time that Smith didn't play. But it gets even worse. During their Super Bowl run between 1992 to 1995, when the Cowboys were at their best, they were 0-4 when Smith didn't play. So much for that narrative. But here's what's even more interesting. If we examine the numbers when Barry Sanders didn't play and evaluate his value to his team, the numbers are shocking. Sanders also missed 7 games, and during those 7 games, the Lions had a winning record. Let that sink in. They won 57% of the time compared to Smith's 16%. When Sanders didn't play, the Lions won. When Smith didn't play, the Cowboys lost. Those are facts. In fact, it's even more amazing that the Detroit Lions had a better season and made it to the playoffs after Sanders retired, compared to the year before when they finished with a 5-11 record and missed the postseason.
While I'm on this road, I got my girl L. One time.
Another argument against Smith is his relatively low career yards per carry of 4.2. This is lower compared to other legendary players like Sanders or Jim Brown, who had higher YPC. But let's consider this. When evaluating running backs, there are more reliable indications than solely relying on YPC. YPC shouldn't be the sole determinant of a running back's true production. It's merely one aspect, like a vehicle that takes you to the end of a story. To truly assess a running back's performance, you need to evaluate the entire picture. So why was Smith's YPC lower compared to his peers? It's because Smith wasn't a running back known for his elite speed. Instead, he consistently gained positive yardage by utilizing his technique, exceptional vision, and the discipline to patiently wait for openings.
If you're a defensive coach and you see EMMITT Smith doing this, watch him hit in and hesitate. There's the hesitation. That's usually a bad sign, because when EMMITT Smith is hesitating, it's because he sees something he likes backside and is waiting for it to develop.
Now, don't get me wrong. Smith was no slouch when it came to explosive runs.
Pick up first down, 2nd and 4. They have a first down and more. Goodbye, EMMITT Smith.
Especially early in his career. However, he wasn't your typical feast or famine back. The numbers often misinterpret chunk yardage running backs because they have more long runs. It gets even more confusing when you add goal line situations to the equation, which always have a negative impact on YPC performance.
And again, it's Smith. Smith this time in. Touchdown, Dallas Cowboys.
That's why it's even more impressive that Smith had comparable YPC numbers as Sanders and other legendary backs during his prime years between 1991 and 1995. Keep in mind that he probably had more goal line touchdowns than any running back in history. Because goal line touchdowns are short yardage plays, therefore Smith's YPC was definitely affected by it. Let's take a closer look at the numbers. During Smith's prime years from 1991 to 1995, he had an average of 4.6 yards per carry, which is slightly higher than his overall career average of 4.2 yards. Now, if we calculate Sanders' yards per carry during that same period, it comes out to be 4.80. Yes, Sanders still surpasses Smith, but the difference is not as significant as one might think. These numbers are quite different from both Smith's career average of 4.2 yards per carry and Sanders' impressive career average of 5 yards per carry. It's also important to note that Sanders' shorter career played a major role in these figures. Had Sanders played as many as 14 seasons, it's doubtful that he would have maintained 5 yards per carry. Furthermore, if we examine Sanders' last year, 1998, it was actually his worst statistical performance in over 5 years. He experienced career lows across the board. It's worth mentioning that he retired at an age where historically around 62% of running backs tend to experience a decline in their performance. The numbers seem to confirm that a decline could have possibly been on the horizon even in 1998. If we compare Sanders' numbers in 1998 with his last 3 seasons, it becomes evident that it was a true drop-off year in terms of his normal statistics. This was to be expected when considering the retirement metric for running backs who played for 10 or more seasons. This argument here is a commonly used excuse when discussing Emmitt Smith's greatness. However, if we're going to exclude him from the greatest of all time argument because of his exceptional line, then we should also exclude Jim Brown. Jim Brown had arguably the greatest offensive line in football history. Let's take a look at some of the legends, and I mean legends, who were a part of that line. First, there's Lou Groza, a Hall of Famer and one of the greatest athletes of the 20th century. Then we have Mike McCormick, another Hall of Famer and a 9-time All-Pro. He's an absolute legend in the sport. Jim Ray Smith, a soon-to-be Hall of Famer, was a 5-time All-Pro and a 5-time Pro Bowler. Gene Hickerson, yet another Hall of Famer, earned 7 All-Pro selections and was a 6-time Pro Bowler. And let's not forget about the Pro Bowlers on that line, such as John Merrill, Dick Scraff, Art Hunter, and Paul Brewster. The prowess on this line was truly amazing. Jim Brown had the privilege of playing with 8 different offensive linemen, all of whom were at one point either All-Pros or Pro Bowlers. So, is Jim Brown overrated because he had the opportunity to play with 8 different Pro Bowlers during his career? Should we hold it against him because he had 3 Hall of Famers on his line, which I might add is 2 more than what Smith had? Let's delve a little deeper. Before Emmitt Smith arrived, Mark Tunney, Nate Newton, and Mark Stepnoski had never earned recognition as Pro Bowlers. They were 3rd and 4th round draft picks. Now, it's not to say that they weren't great players, because they clearly were. But the point is, it wasn't like Smith walked into a perfect situation. During Smith's first 3 years, in which he ran for a total of 4,213 yards and 41 touchdowns, he didn't have a single All-Pro lineman and only had 2 linemen who had played at a Pro Bowl level for 1 year out of those 3 seasons. Another stat that disproves the theory that Smith was solely a product of his line is the yards after contact statistic. Yards after contact measures the yards gained after a player has been hit. This stat is crucial in determining a player's production independent of his offensive line blocking. In 1995, Smith accumulated over 700 yards after contact, with 320 of those yards in the first 6 games. If we compare Smith's yak to the top leaders in the league during the 2018 season, he would have ranked 2nd only behind Barkley. Barkley has been associated with Sanders when it comes to yak production. What's truly impressive is that Smith's production actually increased during the postseason, despite the fact that players generally perform worse in terms of YPC and yak during this time. Smith played in 17 postseason games against elite teams throughout his career, and he managed to amass a remarkable 349 carries, 1,586 yards, and 21 touchdowns. All are records, by the way, postseason records. If we consider this performance in the regular season, Smith would have been an All-Pro against elite defenses. His statistics in the postseason even improved. It begs the question then, what more can you ask of a player? How much more can he give? When the postseason arrived, Smith's greatness was heightened. He maximized his total potential. He wasn't just great in the regular season, he was greater in the postseason. He shined even brighter when the lights was on him. However, the same cannot be said for Sanders. Sanders only played in 6 career playoff games, and out of those, he only recorded over 100 yards rushing twice and scored just 1 touchdown. Unlike Smith, who had career highs across the board, Sanders experienced career lows in the postseason.
Fewest yards rushing in the playoffs. The Lions with Barry Sanders being held to -9. He's carried 11 times for -5 today.
He even had a game where he only gained 1 yard. And it happened against the Packers, a team he had previously rushed for 188 yards against just a couple of weeks earlier. This pattern repeated in 1997 as well. Now, I can already hear the cries of the Lions fans saying that when Barry played in the 90s, his offensive line didn't provide him with any running lanes, and he had to create his own opportunities. They say his line was terrible, but that's all just a myth spread by Detroit Lions fans trying to make excuses for Sanders' shortcomings in the postseason. The truth is, Sanders had a strong lineup with high draft picks in his offensive line. He played alongside 3 linemen who were either All-Pros or Pro Bowlers: Jeff Hardings, Kevin Glover, and the Hall of Famer, Lomas Brown. And he had just as many Hall of Famers on his line as Smith did. Lomas Brown, a true legend, was one of the greatest linemen in NFL history. I'm not claiming that Sanders' line was superior, but let's not overlook the fact that he didn't play with just average players. I know this is about to sound like a contradiction, but EMMITT Smith is not a better running back than Barry Sanders, Walter Payton, or Jim Brown. They were superior runners and better athletes. Trust me, I have no hesitation in acknowledging that fact. In fact, there have been numerous running backs who possess more talent than EMMITT Smith throughout the years. However, my point in starting this video is that talent alone does not determine greatness. Jordan may not have been the highest jumper, Brady may not have had the best arm, and Jerry Rice may not have been the most talented. All of these athletes were once considered the least talented. What made them GOATs was not just their talent, but their ability to maximize their talent and fully utilize all of their abilities to achieve greatness. It's how you use that talent when it matters. It would have been interesting to see what Walter Payton and Barry Sanders would have done if they played on better teams. But this is not an argument on what could have happened, but an argument on what did happen. Smith was the greatest because he reached his full potential. Unfortunately, we didn't get the chance to see the full potential of the other running backs. That's not Smith's fault. All EMMITT Smith did was take advantage of what was given to him. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the strongest, he didn't always defy gravity. He was just the greatest. He achieved all the yards, all the titles, all the championships, accumulated all of the stats, the 4 rushing titles, Offensive Rookie of the Year awards, MVPs. He was a 6-time All-Pro, an 8-time Pro Bowler, 3-time touchdown title holder. He led the entire league in scoring. More yards in NFL history, more touchdowns in NFL history, more yards than any running back in playoff history, more touchdowns, more 100-yard games in the postseason. The list goes on and on. As if there was an achievement to be conquered, he conquered it. This is undeniably what true greatness entails. Reaching the highest potential ever achieved. Conquering the impossible. Epitomizing the Mount Rushmore of the sport. Therefore, when viewed through this lens, when we see it this way, EMMITT Smith undeniably stands as the GOAT. And I firmly believe there is no argument to be made against it. When you combine his exceptional high school numbers with his outstanding NFL career, his total accumulated yards amount to an astonishing 31,000 yards, along with over 300 touchdowns, surpassing any other running back in the history of American football. These combined yards and touchdowns speak volumes. He finished high school as the 2nd all-time rushing yard leader, and then he elevated himself to the peak of the rushing yard throne in the professional league. This is why EMMITT Smith is the greatest running back to have ever played in the NFL. Don't agree? Leave a comment. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And as always, thanks for watching.